Kalvin had never meant to become a cultural ambassador to aliens. He had applied for the interstellar exchange program because the Earthside stipend was absurdly generous, and the program promised 3 hot meals a day, free health care, and no student loans to pay off during the 4-year term. As far as Fred was concerned, that was better than any grad school. Now he sat in a brightly lit mess hall aboard the Gliese academic vessel Tirosh, wedged between 2 beings who looked like someone had tried to crossbreed a bat and a squid with a dash of cactus. Across from him sat his roommate Varnal, the only one of his alien classmates who had both a sense of humor and an actual face, 2 black eyes, a slit mouth, and a smooth gray dome of a head that reminded Fred of an overripe cantaloupe. The tray in front of Fred was a depressing array of nutrient cubes and something that resembled oatmeal but smelled like wet cardboard. He sighed and fished out a small bottle from his utility belt. It was a battered little thing labeled Frankie's Inferno Extra Heat. Varnal's eyes widened the moment Fred twisted the cap. "Chemical threat detected," Varnal said, standing so fast his chair clattered backwards. "Seal your container immediately," Fred blinked. "What this? It's hot sauce." "We put it on food." Varnal's hands flared out in panic. "That is not food safe. That is capsaicin. That is a defense chemical harvested from Earth flora. It causes skin irritation, respiratory inflammation, and hallucinations in 6 known species." Fred paused. "Yeah, that sounds about right." "Tastes great with eggs." 2 other alien students scrambled up from nearby tables, one of them bumping into a tray in the process. The tray hit the floor with a loud clang, drawing even more attention. Within seconds, Fred found himself surrounded by a half-circle of students, all gaping at the bottle like it was radioactive. Okay, Fred raised his hands. "I won't put it on anything until I'm out of the mess hall." Varnal leaned in, nose twitching. "You consume this willingly?" "Yeah." "It's spicy, we like that. But it causes pain." "Yeah, that's the point." The group collectively recoiled. Fred sighed, recapped the bottle, and tucked it away. "I get it. I'll eat it in my room." The incident earned him a behavioral report from the dietary overseer, who was less concerned with diplomacy and more with interspecies contamination protocols. Fred spent the next 3 hours in a decontamination chamber, while the sauce bottle was locked in a stasis-safe container marked hazardous material. Biological. By the time he got back to his room, he was exhausted, hungry, and slightly irritated. Varnal was waiting for him, standing awkwardly in the center of the room with a data pad. "I researched your substance," Varnal said. "I do not understand. Humans willingly consume it even though it activates the same pain receptors as physical injury." Fred flopped onto his bunk. "Because it feels good. I mean, it hurts, but in a way that's exhilarating. Some people run marathons for the same reason. It's about pushing limits." Varnal considered that. "Your species is strange," Fred chuckled. "You have no idea." The next week, Fred's hot sauce incident became a running topic in the interspecies psychology course. Dr. So, a tall, translucent educator from the gas giant colonies, used it as an example of cultural tolerance and perceptual bias. Fred was asked to stand and explain the difference between self-inflicted pain for pleasure and harmful behavior. "It's not about the pain," Fred said, addressing a room of 50 curious eyes. "It's about control. We like to take something scary like fire and tame it, make it part of us." "Hot sauce is like a fire you can eat." A student raised a limb. "Do you consume other poisons?" Fred hesitated. "Well, some folks eat fermented shark meat that smells like ammonia, and we drink alcohol, which is technically toxic, and coffee kind of messes with your heart rate. So." "Yeah, I guess." The room buzzed with quiet murmurs. Dr. So floated forward. "This indicates high adaptability, a biological tolerance for chemical adversity. Fascinating," Fred shrugged. "Or maybe we're just stubborn." The real trouble started 3 days later during the interstellar culinary exchange. Each species was invited to submit a dish from their homeworld. Fred, feeling a need to redeem himself, decided to make buffalo wings. He spent hours in the sterilized kitchen pod, carefully marinating synthetic protein in a mixture of vinegar, cayenne, garlic, and Frankie's Inferno. He wore triple gloves and a filtration mask, just in case anyone walked by. When the wings were finally ready, he placed them on a tray and carried them to his assigned booth. Within minutes, the unmistakable pungency of the sauce filled the air. Students stopped in their tracks. Some covered their faces. One fainted. Fred winced. "Okay, maybe I should have made a milder batch." Varnell arrived, holding a sensor device. "Your booth is emitting volatile irritants. This area must be quarantined." "But it's food," Fred protested. "I followed all the protocols." By the time the culinary overseer arrived, eyes watering and visibly disturbed, half the exhibition hall had cleared out. Fred's tray was confiscated, and he was escorted out under armed escort, though to their credit, the guards were polite about it. Back in his room, Fred sat on his bunk with his head in his hands. Varnell paced. "You are not banned, merely suspended from food-based exhibitions." "Great," Fred muttered. "I'm the guy who weaponized chicken wings." The next day, Fred had to attend a disciplinary hearing. The panel included 2 xenobiologists, the station's health coordinator, and Dr. Imso. Fred explained everything again. The safety measures, the gloves, the masks. Dr. Imso tapped at his data pad. "Your species' relationship with discomfort is paradoxical. You seek it, then celebrate overcoming it. Yeah, that's kind of our thing." After some deliberation, the panel agreed not to expel him but required him to undergo sensitivity training in cross-species dietary customs. Fred agreed. He had little choice. The training sessions were surprisingly interesting. He learned that some species tasted with their skin, others used sound to ferment food. One race could only eat in total darkness, or the enzymes would destabilize. Fred listened, took notes, and asked questions. He started bringing neutral, odorless snacks to class. He even helped another student, a photosynthetic being named Creel, design a light-based dessert, but he never stopped thinking about the hot sauce. 2 weeks later, Varnell approached him with a proposal. "There is a research opportunity," he said. "A controlled trial to test interspecies tolerance for Earth condiments. You would be the lead subject." Fred blinked. "You want to do a hot sauce study? It will be in a fully sealed lab with volunteers." "I believe this could enlighten many about human biochemical resilience." Fred hesitated. "Won't this just get me in trouble again? This time it is sanctioned. You will not be punished for participating." Fred agreed, mostly because he was curious what would happen. The trial was held in a clear chamber with air scrubbers and emergency wash stations. 4 volunteers stood behind protective barriers, each from a different species, and a medical team monitored them via telemetry. Fred took a bite of wing coated in mild, hot sauce. The readings spiked. One volunteer recoiled. Another gagged. But none of them were harmed. He stepped it up medium heat. 2 volunteers opted out. Then came the final level, Frankie's Inferno. Fred took 1 bite, coughed, and immediately reached for milk. His eyes watered. His nose ran. He waved at the camera. "Still alive," he wheezed. Medical readings showed elevated heart rate, increased perspiration, but no lasting damage. When the trial ended, the data was compiled into a report titled Human Pain Tolerance and Cultural Culinary Practices, a case study in controlled poison ingestion. Fred's name was listed as co-author. The findings were circulated among several academic departments. A week later, Dr. Imso invited him to speak at a symposium. Fred stood on a raised platform, facing a crowd of scholars and diplomats. He wore a clean uniform and no hot sauce in sight. "I know it seems strange," he said, "but sometimes the things that scare us become the things we admire most. For humans, fire used to be dangerous. Now we cook with it. Pain used to be something we avoided. Now we use it to grow. Hot sauce, it's just one example. But it tells you a lot about who we are." There was a pause, then light applause. Alien applause, flashing lights, subtle vibrations, a few bursts of melodic humming. Afterward, Varnell clapped him on the back gently. "You may have nearly poisoned half the station," he said, "but you also made them think." Fred grinned. "Think that humans are nuts. Think that maybe pain is not always the enemy." Fred nodded. "We call it hot sauce, you call it poison, but maybe it's both." And that somehow was enough. Fred sat cross-legged in the observation lab, balancing a cooling gel pack between his shoulder blades. The ceiling panels pulsed with a calming blue light, and the faint hum of the air recyclers filled the silence. A shallow bowl of sliced fruit, something purple and fibrous that tasted faintly like kiwi and static electricity, rested on the floor beside him, untouched. Across the room, Varnell hovered near a diagnostic console, his digits tapping against the interface with a twitchy rhythm. "I still don't understand why your body treats temperature like a challenge," Varnell said without turning. "The sensors showed your core temperature increased by nearly 2 degrees during the ingestion phase." "That's barely a fever," Fred replied. "Besides, it dropped right back down after the milk." "You drank dairy to neutralize a chemical irritant," Varnell said flatly. "Do you also use tree bark to treat venom?" Fred rubbed his eyes. "Actually, yeah, willow bark, salicin, it's how we got aspirin." Varnell turned then, his mouth slightly ajar. "You discovered a painkiller inside a tree and decided to eat it." "We didn't know it was a painkiller until after we ate it." Silence lingered between them, broken only by a soft chirp from the console. Varnell frowned at the screen and adjusted the display. "You experienced minor capillary dilation and transient lacrimation," he said. "That just means I got teary-eyed." "You're minimizing systemic stress," Varnell said, gesturing toward Fred's chart. "Your heart rate fluctuated dramatically." "You experienced facial flushing, excessive perspiration, and involuntary vocalization. You screamed." Fred picked up a slice of the fruit and nibbled it. "I wouldn't call it a scream, more like a victory yell." "You shouted, 'Oh God, why?' and then collapsed onto the floor." Fred shrugged. "It's part of the experience." "I fail to see how that qualifies as a desirable outcome." Fred stood and stretched, wincing as his back cracked. "Look, it's not about wanting to suffer, it's about pushing past it. Like running up a hill just to see the view on the other side. That metaphor is meaningless to a species without terrestrial locomotion." "Fine," Fred said. "Imagine submerging yourself in a solvent that briefly destabilizes your membrane integrity but leaves you feeling euphoric after." Varnell shuddered. "We call that chemical warfare." Fred clapped him on the shoulder. "Exactly. And we put it on nachos." Later that cycle, Fred was summoned to the Behavioral Integration Annex, a place with too many reflective surfaces and not enough furniture. He sat on an angular stool that kept shifting height, trying to appear more relaxed than he felt. Across from him, a tall, insectoid being with translucent wings and a flickering eye strip regarded him with a gaze somewhere between curiosity and concern. "You initiated a trial involving known irritants without prior cross-species clearance," the being said. Fred folded his hands. "It was supervised. The participants volunteered. None of them were exposed directly, but the olfactory particles dispersed beyond containment. I followed all the safety protocols. I didn't even breathe near the vents." The being paused. "Your species' definition of safe appears inconsistent with interstellar norms." Fred leaned forward. "You've got to understand, humans adapt by testing limits. We don't know where the wall is until we run into it. You ran into it carrying a tray of volatile poultry, which no one was forced to eat." The being's wings fluttered once, a sound like paper rubbing against glass. "The Council has decided not to restrict your access to culinary facilities, but recommends you refrain from introducing unvetted substances into shared environments." Fred nodded. "Understood. I'll keep the spice in my quarters." As he stepped out of the annex, Varnell was waiting beside a column of hydroponic vines, clutching a folded data sheet. They want to publish your trial results in the Comparative Physiology Journal, Varnell said. You'll be listed as a co-author again, Fred blinked. Seriously, apparently, your pain response profile has become a case study in adaptive neurochemical feedback. Fred squinted. Is that a good thing? It means you're now considered a viable anomaly. Fred scratched his chin. I'll take it. 2 days later, he was back in the biochem lab, but this time, not as the subject. He stood behind a counter, wearing a lab coat that was 2 sizes too large and had someone else's name stitched into the collar. A dozen alien students observed from behind a transparent barrier, seated on levitating pads that adjusted to their physiology. Varnell stood beside him, holding up a clear atomizer vial. This, he said, is a diluted extract of the human substance known as liquid smoke. It is derived from combusted wood and used to simulate the flavor of direct flame exposure. The class murmured. A few began taking notes. Fred took the vial and sprayed a fine mist over a protein cube. He sliced it and handed the sample to the automated arm, which delivered it to the observation gallery. A student with a translucent skull and no visible mouth absorbed the sample through its dermal cilia. Its eye node pulsed a soft green. It tastes like burnt carbon, it said. Fred grinned. That's kind of the point. Another student raised a limb. Why flavor food with the byproducts of destruction? Fred leaned on the counter. Because the smell of smoke means survival. It means we made it through the night. The room went quiet again, but not in discomfort, in understanding. Varnell pulled up a new slide. Next, we will examine the substance known as mustard, which triggers a different set of nociceptors and olfactory responses. It is derived from crushed seeds and used to enhance flavor through irritation. Fred began prepping the samples, careful to portion the sauce with precision. He'd learned his lesson about overdoing it. Why do your people mix so many chemicals into their food? Someone asked. We've got over 1,000 taste receptors, Fred replied, and we get bored easily. Is that also why you ferment things until they rot and then eat them? Pretty much. The class recorded every word. Later that evening, Fred returned to his quarters to find a small package sitting on his bunk. It was wrapped in a sterile cloth and sealed with a label from the xenobotany department. He peeled it open to reveal a small jar of amber paste with a note attached. For you to try, it read. Made from the fermented root of the Drellin fire tuber, comparable to your wasabi, consume with caution. Fred sniffed the jar and nearly recoiled. The scent hit like a punch between the eyes, sharp, earthy, and slightly electric. He dipped the corner of a cracker into the paste and hesitated. Varnell, who had been reading from his bunk, glanced up. You're going to eat that? Fred popped it into his mouth. The burn was immediate. A rapid fire rushed through his sinuses and up into his skull. His eyes watered, his ears rang, and for a moment he felt like he'd just been slapped by lightning. Then it faded, leaving a strange clarity. He exhaled slowly. Wow, that's got kick. Varnell tilted his head. You're crying. Fred wiped his eyes. No, I'm learning. By the end of the week, word of Fred's palate durability had spread beyond the academic vessel. He was invited to a virtual summit on interspecies tolerance, where he shared a panel with a cephaloid spice chemist and a Terran biologist who specialized in sensory adaptation. Fred kept his answers simple and honest. We're not fearless, he said. We just get used to fear until it stops controlling us. The cephaloid blinked all 6 of its eyes. Or perhaps you've redefined fear as curiosity. Fred laughed. That's probably closer to the truth. Back in the mess hall, things had changed. No more alarms when he opened a bottle. No more students fleeing in panic. Instead, curious glances, cautious questions, and the occasional request for a whiff. One afternoon, a small group of students approached his table carrying trays with experimental dishes. One had added trace amounts of horseradish analog. Another had tried fermenting a local root in vinegar. They waited silently as Fred tasted each. He gave his feedback thoughtfully. Slight bite, smooth finish. Needs contrast, maybe something pickled. They nodded, scribbled notes, and walked off discussing ratios. Varnell sat beside him, watching. Your influence has become systemic. Fred took a bite of his sandwich, a bland protein slab with a generous swipe of the Drellin paste. Guess pain really is a flavor. Varnell nodded. A flavor your species refuses to give up. Fred smiled, eyes watering again. That's because giving up's never been our style. By the fourth rotation of the new cycle, Fred had managed to avoid setting off any emergency protocols, which he considered a personal record. Varnell, however, insisted on scheduling a voluntary physiological recalibration session in the medbay, just to be thorough. Fred suspected it had less to do with his vitals and more to do with Varnell's compulsive need to document anomalies before they went and did something weirder. The medbay smelled faintly of sterilized algae. Fred lay reclined on a diagnostic slab while a med tech named Hroughton, a gliding, feathered being from the helix spires, adjusted the scanner dome above him. The machine buzzed once, then began its sweep. Remain still, Hroughton said. We are checking for capillary damage and mucosal degradation. I feel fine, Fred replied, eyes following the rotating sensors above. That is not the same as being fine. Fred didn't argue. He'd learned that on this vessel, feelings ranked somewhere below calibrated metrics and instrument-confirmed truths. Varnell stood nearby, holding a slate. You've consumed 32 chemically active condiments since the initial trial. 33, Fred corrected. I tried a Reluvian pickling paste yesterday, tasted like motor oil and regret. Hroughton's feathers flattened. That is not listed in your intake log. I didn't think it qualified as food. Everything you ingest qualifies, whether or not it resembles sustenance. Fred exhaled and stared at the ceiling. Okay then, yeah, 33, the scanner dinged. No hemorrhaging, Hroughton said, sounding faintly disappointed. Minor epithelial stress. Thermal receptors show temporary desensitization. Is that bad? It is inconsistent with baseline human profiles. Your nociceptors have adapted unusually fast. It's probably not the first time I've singed them, Fred said. I used to eat ghost peppers on dares. Hroughton blinked slowly. That is a distressing sentence. Fred sat up and rubbed the back of his neck. So am I cleared? Physiologically, yes, Varnell said, but there are policy implications. I haven't violated any protocols since the last review. You haven't, but you've become a reference point. Fred raised an eyebrow. For what? Threshold extremity. Hroughton tapped at his console. We have 3 other humans on record. None display your tolerance range. Your data skews the average. Fred swung his legs off the slab. I didn't ask to be statistically inconvenient. No one chooses to be non-representative, Varnell said. But you are now the basis for a revised interspecies dietary caution model. Fred stood. I'm not the human standard. I'm just the only one dumb enough to apply hot sauce like war paint. Hroughton's feathers puffed. That metaphor is deeply troubling. Fred sighed. Then maybe stop treating me like a baseline. You are not being punished, Varnell said, but your presence has influenced perception. Some students now equate human cuisine with masochism. Fred tilted his head. Did someone complain? Not formally. But the Solari linguistics cohort requested opaque barriers during meal periods. Because of me. Because of the lingering fumes from your fermented cabbage project. Fred winced. Okay, that one's fair. Even I barely survived that jar. Hroughton handed him a data chip. This contains a summary of your test results. You may review them at your discretion. Fred pocketed it. I'll add it to my growing collection of medical trivia about myself. As he left the medbay, Varnell walked beside him in silence until they reached the corridor junction that led toward the auxiliary commons. I think you enjoy the challenge, Varnell said finally. Fred slowed. What challenge? Being the outlier, defying expectation, Fred leaned against the corridor wall. I didn't come here to be anyone's symbol. I came for the stipend. I brought hot sauce because I didn't think I'd survive 4 years without it. And yet you now hold informal seminars on Earth condiments. Fred gave a lopsided smile. Yeah, that part sort of happened on accident. There's a symposium tomorrow, Varnell said. A panel on interspecies gustatory adaptation. They want you to present, Fred frowned. I already did that once. This time they want you to demonstrate. He stared at Varnell. You mean? Eat something. Something deliberately engineered to approach but not exceed your known tolerance threshold. Fred scratched his temple. That sounds like you're trying to hurt me on purpose. No, Varnell said, just measure you more accurately. There are easier ways to be liked. You are not being liked. You are being studied, comforting. The next cycle, Fred sat behind a sealed culinary partition in a small auditorium carved into the central ring of the vessel. The audience, composed primarily of research faculty and visiting diplomats, observed from behind polarized shielding. A tray of sample dishes rested on the table in front of him, each covered with a numbered lid. Varnell stood on the other side of the glass, speaking into a translator node. Each sample introduces a unique irritant compound synthesized based on your previous tolerances. You may withdraw at any point. Fred adjusted his gloves. I'd like that in writing. Verbal consent is sufficient. Not on Earth it isn't. The first sample was a reddish paste with a jagged aroma. Fred dabbed a corner of it onto a neutral starch wafer and ate it, his pupils dilated slightly. It's got a stinging start, he said. But the heat dies off quick. He continued through the next 4 samples, each one escalating in intensity. By the 6th, sweat dotted his forehead, his breathing quickened, but he stayed seated. This one's got capsaicin analogs. My tongue feels like it's being microwaved. The audience murmured. Fred reached the final sample. Varnell's voice came through a low speaker. This compound was derived from a Drelksin root fermentation, combined with a stabilized acid from the Jorvin algae strain. It has not been tested on humans. Fred picked up the spoon. So I'd be the first? Yes. Can I get hazard pay? No, didn't think so. He tasted it. For a moment, nothing happened. Then his entire face flushed. His ears rang. His throat closed just slightly, not dangerously, but enough to make him sit back and blink rapidly. That's intense, he wheezed. Pain scale. About a 9 out of 10. Maybe 9.5, definitely not recreational. A medic approached from the side, holding a monitor. Fred waved them off. I'm okay, just need a minute. The audience remained silent. Then, slowly, a few began tapping notes on their slates. One raised an appendage and emitted a low harmonic tone applause, apparently from their species. Fred took a sip of chilled broth and leaned back, breathing through his nose. I don't recommend that one for picnics, he said. Later, back in his quarters, he lay on his bunk with a cool towel across his forehead. Varnell sat at the desk, typing up a report. You didn't have to go through all of them, Varnell said. I know. Then why did you? Fred pulled the towel off and stared at the ceiling. Because the more they know about us, the less they'll be afraid of us, or worse, think we're boring. Varnell paused. You believe pain makes you interesting? No, but our willingness to face it might. Varnell stood and walked to the door. The data was conclusive, he said. You've surpassed all recorded thresholds for your species. Fred nodded. What do I win? No prize. Just less anonymity. Fred turned the towel over and replaced it. I'll take it. Varnell hesitated, then added, You've altered the curriculum, you know. There's now a module on human culinary extremophilia. That a real word, it is now. Fred smiled faintly. Great. I'm a textbook example. You're more than that, Varnell said. You're a reminder that discomfort can be survived, even understood. Fred closed his eyes. That's probably the nicest thing anyone said to me after setting my own mouth on fire. Varnell left without another word. Fred lay in silence, the ache in his throat fading to a dull glow. He wasn't sure if he'd made first contact better or worse, but at least now, no one would ever forget what a human was capable of when handed a bottle labeled "Do not ingest." And for once, that felt like enough.